Imagine, for just a second, walking into this quaint, kind of dusty country store, just
Yeah.
somewhere off the interstate.
Right, like middle of nowhere.
Yeah, exactly. And you're a little annoyed because the gas pump outside is, one of those old rotary ones.
The ones with the spinning
Yeah.
number.
And you're really just hoping they have an ATM inside. So you walk through the screen door, you hear the little bell jingle, and you look at the men sitting around a card table in the back.
Setting the scene. I like it.
Well, in your mind, you are the customer, right? You are the center of this momentary capitalist transaction.
You have the power.
Exactly. You inherently trust the implicit social contract that says your money guarantees your safety, it guarantees service.
That's how society works.
Right. But what happens to the human mind when you suddenly realize that to the men in that room, you aren't a customer at all?
Oh, man.
You're livestock.
It is just the ultimate vanishing act of societal illusion.
It really is.
The moment that realization hits, the entire framework of civilization laws, morality, basic human empathy, it all just evaporates in a fraction of a second.
And that terrifying evaporation is exactly what we are plunging into today. Welcome to the deep dive.
Glad to be here for this one.
We are immersing ourselves and you, the listener, into a truly visceral, totally uncompromising piece of source material today.
Uncompromising is definitely the right word.
We are examining excerpts from the novel Depraved by Bryan Smith. Now, for those unfamiliar, this falls into the category of splatterpunk horror.
Yeah, which is intense.
Super intense.
Yeah.
Splatterpunk emerged back in the 1980s specifically as a rebellion against the sanitized, kind of implied violence of traditional horror.
It pushes boundaries really aggressively.
It does. But we aren't here today to just recount a gory campfire story.
Not at all. Because when you strip away the extreme shock value of splatterpunk, what you are left with is a highly pressurized, really dark laboratory for human behavior.
I love that phrase, a dark laboratory.
Yeah, but pushing characters far past the boundaries of standard societal norms, the text allows us to observe the raw, unfiltered mechanics of survival. We get to look at trauma and systemic corruption up close.
And that is the mission today. We are going to extract the profound psychological and sociological insights hidden within this brutal narrative.
There's a lot to dig into.
There really is. We are going to explore the mechanics behind how rapidly the rules of civilized society disintegrate. And we'll look at the actual neurological and psychological responses of the human mind when it is forced to adapt to unimaginable horrors.
It gets dark fast.
It does. We are going to ask you to consider how incredibly fragile the unwritten rules of your own daily life might truly be. So, grab a mental safety harness because we are going off the edge. Okay, let's unpack this.
I'm ready when you are.
We need to start with the inciting incidents, because the way this narrative pulls our main characters into the rural nightmare of Hopkins Bend and its blighted, abandoned neighbor town, Dandridge, it's basically a masterclass in contrasting reality.
It really sets the stage perfectly.
Let's look at Jessica Sloane first. In almost any other story in this genre, the protagonist is an innocent, helpless victim who accidentally wanders off the beaten path, right?
Right. The typical horror setup.
Yeah, but Jessica shatters that mold immediately. When we meet her, she is white-knuckling the steering wheel of a stolen cherry-red 1963 Ford Falcon Futura.
What an image.
And there is no air conditioning. It is the sweltering, suffocating heat of midsummer in the South.
It's miserable.
The upholstery is worn down to the metal springs, the engine is deafening, and here's the kicker. She has her rapist, a scruffy Nashville musician named Hoke, locked in the trunk.
Yeah, the author uses those sensory details so well to build a claustrophobic psychological profile before we even know her full history.
You really feel the heat.
You do. The oppressive heat, the sweat, the loud AM radio blasting a static garbled gospel station. And that radio is on specifically to drown out the frantic thumping coming from the trunk.
It's so intense.
Jessica is not fleeing a monster in these opening pages. She is actively stepping outside the boundaries of the social contract to enact lethal, premeditated vigilante justice.
She is driving out to the deep woods to execute him with a .38 caliber revolver that her army captain father gave her.
It's a heavy start.
And what's brilliant is the dissonance in her character. Like, she is wearing designer jeans. She is hyper aware of her genuine Prada runway bag sitting on the passenger seat.
Wait, the Prada bag?
Yeah, a bag she bought with a $5,000 check from her mother just days before her mother unexpectedly committed suicide.
She has so much baggage,
Yeah.
literally and figuratively.
Exactly. She is a walking embodiment of complex upper-middle-class modern trauma. She's a woman who was pushed completely past her breaking point by brutal sexual assault, and she has made this conscious, terrifying decision to seize absolute violent control of her life.
To understand the gravity of that, we have to look at the concept of moral injury.
Right, moral injury. Break that down for us.
So, moral injury occurs when someone perpetrates, fails to prevent, or witnesses acts that transgress deeply held moral beliefs. Usually we talk about it with combat veterans.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. But Jessica's assault was a profound violation of her world, right?
Yeah.
But her decision to kidnap Hoke and plan his murder, that is a self-inflicted moral injury.
She's doing it to herself.
Exactly. She has already initiated the dismantling of her own civilized morality before she even reaches the town limits of Hopkins Bend.
And then the text masterfully contrasts her with our other outsiders, Pete and Megan. They are just the quintessential insulated modern couple on a road trip.
Totally oblivious.
They're floating in a bubble of complete societal trust. Megan is literally reading a horror novel called City Infernal in the passenger seat.
Which is so ironic.
Right. She is totally engrossed in fictional, curated terror, completely blind to the very real, uncurated terror looming in the trees passing by her window.
It really highlights the luxury of fictional fear. When society feels impenetrable, we seek out horror as entertainment because our primal threat response systems are just bored.
We want to be scared safely.
Exactly. Megan can enjoy a scary book because she implicitly believes the steel shell of her VW Jetta and the asphalt of the interstate are these protective talismans.
And Pete embodies that hubris even more. He pulls their car into the Hopkins Bend General Store because they need gas.
The scene you mentioned at the start.
Yeah. He looks at the pump, sees those old spinning rotary numbers instead of a digital screen, and he is visibly annoyed. He jokes to Megan, "Welcome to 1970," and complains that he really hopes these rednecks take credit cards.
He's just so modern.
His entire worldview is predicated on the convenience and safety nets of the 21st century. He expects ATMs, he expects cellular service, and he expects that commerce is a universal language that protects the buyer.
Sociologically speaking, Pete is demonstrating an extreme reliance on institutional trust.
Institutional trust.
Yeah. He views the locals not as potential threats, but as quaint, perhaps culturally backward extras in the movie of his own life.
That's a great way to put it, extras in his movie.
But the text forces a brutal shift in perspective the second he walks through the screen door of that general store. The musty smell, the silent men playing cards with hollow, predatory expressions.
It's so creepy.
And that massive, florid-faced man behind the counter wearing a cap that reads, "American by birth, Southern by the grace of God."
Such a vivid detail.
Pete's amygdala, the fear center of his brain, is signaling that he has entered an alien territory. But his cognitive conditioning overrides it.
His brain is trying to rationalize it.
Right. His brain insists, I am a paying customer in a retail establishment, therefore I am safe.
Which brings up a crucial analytical point. I like to think of the town borders of Hopkins Bend not just as a geographical line, but as the event horizon of a black hole.
Oh, I like that analogy.
Well, in physics, once you cross the event horizon, the laws of relativity break down. Space and time warp into something unrecognizable. In Hopkins Bend, it is the physics of morality and cause and effect that warp.
The rules just stop applying.
So, looking at the psychology of our two sets of characters, does Jessica's initial proactive crime, the fact that she essentially brought her own violence into the woods, make her uniquely equipped to survive this moral black hole compared to Pete and Megan?
That is the pivotal question of the first act. And the psychological mechanics at play provide a pretty complex answer.
Right.
Yes, Jessica has a distinct advantage, but it isn't just about having a gun. It's about cognitive flexibility.
Cognitive flexibility.
Yeah. Jessica has already shattered her own illusion of safety when she pulls Hoke out of the trunk, marches him into the woods, and prepares to pull the trigger. She believes she has successfully transitioned into the apex predator of this environment.
She thinks she's in charge.
But then, the execution is interrupted. She hears twigs snap, and out of the brush step the Kinchers, these massive, hideously deformed men in filthy overalls wielding shotguns.
The psychological whiplash in that clearing must be catastrophic. She goes from holding the power of life and death over her abuser to realizing she is entirely outmatched.
The whiplash is immense, but here is where her advantage kicks in. In trauma psychology, we talk about the threat response cycle: fight, flight, freeze, or fawn.
Right, the classic responses.
For a normal person, a sudden, incomprehensible threat usually triggers a massive freeze response, while the brain frantically tries to categorize what it is seeing.
Because it just doesn't make sense.
Exactly. But Jessica is already operating in a state of hyperarousal. Her sympathetic nervous system is already flooded with adrenaline.
She's already primed for violence.
Because her mindset is already geared toward violence and survival, her freeze response lasts mere milliseconds. She doesn't try to reason with the mutants. She fires a wild shot to create distance and instantly transitions into flight, running in a zigzag pattern through the deep woods.
Compare that to Pete in the general store. When the massive man behind the counter casually reaches down and pulls a pump-action shotgun, Pete is entirely paralyzed by his civilized conditioning.
He just freezes.
He doesn't fight, he doesn't run, he tries to negotiate. He politely asks how far the next gas station is.
It's almost sad.
His prefrontal cortex simply refuses to compute that a standard retail transaction has unilaterally transformed into a violent abduction.
The denial is strong.
Because of that cognitive delay, that prolonged freeze response, he is easily tackled by the card players, the doors are locked, and he is knocked unconscious with the butt of the shotgun.
Pete is a victim of what we might call civilized learned helplessness.
Learned helplessness.
Yeah, we're trained from birth to outsource our physical protection to the police, to the law, to societal norms. When those are stripped away, the modern citizen has no immediate neural pathway for raw physical self-preservation.
We literally don't know how to save ourselves.
Right. Jessica, through her trauma and subsequent vigilante mission, had already begun carving out that primitive neural pathway.
But even Jessica's modern logic fights against the reality of the black hole. When she is running through the woods, panting and exhausted, she finds a crystal clear stream and drinks from it.
Right.
And right in the middle of fleeing for her life from mutated men with shotguns, her 21st century brain starts running through hypotheses. She wonders why the men were deformed.
She's trying to analyze it.
She starts thinking about secret nuclear power plants, dirty bombs, chemical runoff. She actually starts worrying that the water she just drank might be carcinogenic.
It highlights the desperate attempt of the human mind to impose rational scientific order onto chaotic terror. She is trying to diagnose the monsters using the vocabulary of the modern world.
It's absurd, but it's so incredibly human. She's worrying about long-term cellular mutation while actively being hunted.
Yeah, her brain is clinging to what it knows.
But the moment she realizes that her cell phone is sitting uselessly inside her Prada bag back in the stolen Falcon, the modern vocabulary fails. She realizes no one is coming.
She's completely cut off.
She is fully crossed into a deeply entrenched alternative society. And this leads us to what I think is the most disturbing aspect of the text, how this town actually functions.
The sociological architecture of Hopkins Bend is, without a doubt, the most chilling element of the narrative. It moves beyond individual malice into systemic horror.
Here is what I'm struggling with, though. You have the feral, mutated Kinchers out in the woods. They are terrifying in a very primal, cinematic way.
Like a classic monster movie.
Yeah. But the real horror, the thing that actually makes my skin crawl, is the bureaucratic efficiency of the town itself.
Yeah.
Hopkins Bend operates with two distinct faces.
Right, the dual society.
You have the public-facing infrastructure, a sheriff's department with cruisers, a functional general store, a hardware store, an active used car lot.
Looks like any small town.
And then you have the hidden face in the deep woods, which is controlled by these old, wealthy, cannibalistic dynasties, specifically the Maynard and Preston families. Here's where it gets really interesting.
What's fascinating here is how the author uses the concept of institutional betrayal.
Institutional betrayal.
Typically, we view local law enforcement as the ultimate shield against lawlessness. In Hopkins Bend, the sheriff's department is not a shield. It is the primary intake valve and regulator for the hidden evil.
We see this play out in agonizing detail with Megan. After Pete is abducted in the store, Megan hides outside and watches someone else drive Pete's car away.
She has no idea what's going on.
She is terrified, wandering down the rural highway, and she spots a sheriff's cruiser. She flags it down. In her mind, the social contract has just been reinstated. The police are here.
Safety has arrived.
The deputy, Hal, gets out, listens to her panicked story, and says he needs to pat her down for safety. He finds a wallet in her pocket, the wallet of another missing woman named Michelle Runyon, which Megan had stumbled across earlier on the road.
Such bad luck.
And the second Hal sees that ID, his demeanor fundamentally changes.
This is where the institutional betrayal becomes weaponized. Hal doesn't just arrest her, he actively gaslights her.
It's awful to read.
He claims the men at the general store have a first-rate reputation in the community. He accuses Megan of being a drug addict who stole the wallet. He is using the legitimate authority of the state to isolate, discredit, and capture a victim for the town's illicit economy.
And the terror exponentially compounds when they arrive at the station. This scene is a masterclass in normalizing the absolute grotesque.
It's so disturbing.
Hal throws Megan into a holding cell and immediately attempts to sexually assault her. He is forcibly stripping her down, and just as the listener's anxiety peaks, the door opens, and Sheriff Rich DeMars walks in.
The big boss.
DeMars is described as a stocky, florid-faced man in a Stetson hat and a string tie. He demands that Hal stop immediately. For one fleeting, desperate second, you think, thank God. The sheriff is corrupt maybe, but he has a line. He's going to stop this.
But the motivation behind his intervention is entirely devoid of morality. He isn't stopping a sexual assault to uphold the law. He is stopping an employee from damaging corporate assets.
Exactly. He explicitly tells Hal not to mess with the merchandise. DeMars looks at a terrified, half-naked Megan cowering in a cell, and he is mentally running a spreadsheet.
Like she's just a product.
He calculates that because she is young and attractive, he can negotiate a $5,000 bounty for her from the Preston family.
Unbelievable.
The Prestons run a sprawling strip club out in the deep woods called the Sin Den, an establishment fueled entirely by the human trafficking of abducted outsiders.
If we look at this through the lens of philosopher Hannah Arendt's concept of the banality of evil, it becomes profoundly disturbing.
The banality of evil.
Arendt's theorized that great evils in history weren't necessarily committed by sociopaths, but by ordinary people who accepted the premises of their system and simply do their jobs. DeMars operates precisely like a ruthless, pragmatic middle manager. His enforcement of the rules is horrifyingly calculated.
He doesn't just yell at Hal or write him up. DeMars pulls a taser and drops his own deputy to the linoleum floor.
It's out of nowhere.
Then, standing over the convulsing man, DeMars decides he needs to provide an object lesson to the rest of the department about following his supply chain protocols. He casually pulls down Hal's uniform pants, takes out a Jinsu-style folding knife, and severs Hal's penis.
He is so visceral.
And he does this while making breezy, conversational jokes about old late-night television commercials. When the bleeding deputy manages to get blood on DeMars' trousers, the sheriff calmly pulls his sidearm and executes him with a shot to the head.
The absolute banality of that violence is what makes it so resonant. The town functions as a hyper-exaggerated dark mirror of unregulated capitalism and entrenched nepotism.
It's a business.
And it isn't just the police. The entire local economy is complicit. Sam Brown's used car dealership on the main road doubles as a chop shop that scrubs the VIN numbers and cleans the titles of the vehicles belonging to the abducted victims. The text explicitly points out that Michelle Runyon's sleek Lamborghini is sitting right there on his lot, ready to be fenced. The county clerk is on the payroll, providing fresh license plates.
I have to say, that municipal cooperation is far more terrifying to me than a slasher in the woods.
It's systemic.
The idea that a sheriff calmly negotiates a human bounty, that there's a seamless logistical understanding with the county clerk, that the entire town is essentially a cooperative business model built on abduction, rape, and cannibalism. It elevates the horror from individual malice to a municipal budget line item.
Systemic, institutionalized evil implies a massive collective agreement. Generations of people in Hopkins Bend have culturally agreed that outsiders, anyone not born into their specific bloodlines, are not legally or morally human.
You're just resources.
They are commodities.
Yeah.
They're dinner for the traditional holiday feasts, or they're forced labor, or their cars are capital to be liquidated. To maintain that quaint facade of rural life while secretly managing a slaughterhouse requires a staggering community-wide level of cognitive dissonance.
Okay, but as brilliant as that sociological setup is, the text throws a massive curveball. Even within this highly organized, humanly orchestrated evil, there is a chaotic, irrational force lurking deeper in the woods that even Sheriff DeMars and the powerful Maynard family are terrified of.
Right. We can't forget the woods.
And this brings us to the Kinchers and the entity known as Garner.
Honestly, I'm struggling with this part of the narrative. We just spent all this time establishing this terrifyingly realistic, bureaucratic, human evil, and suddenly there's a shadow monster. Doesn't that tonal clash undermine the realism?
It is a jarring shift, but if we connect this to the broader thematic picture of the novel, the introduction of the supernatural actually serves to magnify the depravity of the human villains.
Magnify it. How?
To understand why, we have to look at how the lore is introduced.
Right. We experience this lore through Hoke, the rapist Jessica abandoned in the woods. Hoke wakes up inside a decrepit, rotting old barn, completely stripped of his clothes, and his first encounter is with, well, a pack of hive-mind pigs.
Which sounds crazy, but it works. The text describes these feral hogs moving with a chilling group intelligence, staring at him with collective malice. A smaller pig steps forward and nips at his bare foot.
Testing him.
Hoke, trying to assert some kind of dominance in a situation he doesn't understand, kicks the pig across the floor. He actually laughs, trying to brush it off, and calls it pig bowling.
He's still trying to be tough.
But the animals don't scatter. They swarm him in a coordinated strike, forcing him to scramble up the walls and throw himself into an empty horse stall to survive.
It's a darkly comic sequence, but functionally it establishes that the environmental corruption of Dandridge and the deep woods goes all the way down to the flora and fauna. The ecosystem itself is hostile.
The very ground is bad.
And then, trapped in that stall, the true supernatural element manifests. Hoke uncovers a human skull hidden in the hay, a skull with a pickaxe hole driven straight through the cranium. That acts as a catalyst for Garner.
Garner doesn't appear as a man. He manifests as a living shadow, a sticky darkness that literally absorbs the light emitting from Hoke's Coleman lantern. And Garner speaks to him.
A literal voice in the dark.
We learn that Garner is an ancient, vengeful entity. He explains that back in 1872, the ancestors of the Kincher clan raped and murdered his kin. In retaliation, Garner laid a blood curse on their entire lineage.
Generational punishment.
This curse resulted in the Garner blight, the severe physical deformities we see in the Kinchers today. They are born with elephant trunk-like noses, single giant eyes in the center of their foreheads, elongated, distorted jaws.
And the author doesn't just tell us about Garner's power, he demonstrates it brutally. While Hoke is cowering in the stall, 4 young Kincher children enter the barn.
This scene is wild.
They are mutated, terrifying in their own right, and they begin leering at Hoke, sexually gratifying themselves by watching his utter humiliation and terror. But suddenly Garner's sticky darkness violently expands and engulfs them.
Just swallows them up.
Hoke is forced to watch as a thick, physical tendril of this blackness wraps tightly around the arm of a Kincher boy. With a sickening crunch, the darkness literally rips the arm completely out of the socket and throws the severed, bleeding limb right over the partition into Hoke's stall.
It is a scene of absolute mind-shattering carnage. But coming back to my pushback, does introducing an 1872 supernatural curse distract from the very real evil of the Maynards and Prestons?
I would argue it makes the human villains significantly worse by comparison.
How so?
Think about the dynamics at play. The Kinchers are physically monstrous, and they are highly dangerous, but fundamentally they are victims of generational trauma.
They didn't ask for this.
Exactly. They are trapped in mutated bodies, ostracized from society, paying an eternal price for a crime committed in 1872 by ancestors they never knew.
They are essentially cursed to be monsters against their will.
Precisely. Now contrast that with how the normal cannibal families, the Maynards, the Prestons, the corrupt law enforcement, view the Kinchers. They view them with absolute, unmitigated disgust.
Like they're beneath them.
Later in the text, a local hunter explicitly tells Jessica that the Kinchers are a separate, lesser problem. They are treated as an untouchable lower caste. So you have these human families who actively, consciously choose to institutionalize kidnapping, torture, and cannibalism for profit and tradition, and they have the sheer audacity to look down on the Kinchers for being deformed.
Ah, I see. The supernatural element adds a layer of Gothic fatalism. It suggests that the evil in Hopkins Bend is a localized rot, baked deep into the soil. But the human families took that ambient, cursed environment and industrialized it.
Exactly. They weaponized the blight. And surrounded by both organized human depravity and ancient supernatural curses, the outsiders who are captured are pushed to the absolute limits of human endurance.
Which brings us to the psychology of the captives.
Yes, a deeply uncomfortable but vital psychological analysis how the minds of the captives attempt to survive and the specific mechanisms of how they break.
We see a wide, horrifying spectrum of psychological responses here. Let's look at Pete first. After being beaten and sexually assaulted by the men at the general store, Pete is tossed into the back of a panel van and driven deep into the woods to a sprawling ranch house.
His whole world is ended at this point.
He is dragged out and sees a row of chain-link dog pens filled with aggressive Dobermans and pit bulls. He fully believes he is about to be torn apart and fed to the dogs, but instead he's thrown into the very last pen, which doesn't hold an animal.
It holds a person.
It holds a woman named Justine. She is completely naked, covered in layers of filth and grime, just rocking back and forth in the dirt.
Justine is the physical embodiment of the psychological abyss. When Pete first sees her, he has a grim preview of what his own mind could become if he remains in that cage.
It's like looking into his own future.
When she finally begins to speak, the extent of her cognitive fracturing becomes apparent.
She recounts her backstory to Pete with a chilling, detached calmness. She tells him she is a Wellesley-educated woman. She had a successful career, a normal, happy life in the real world, but she was abducted by the Preston family while traveling with her fiancé, Jim.
And her story is just unimaginable.
She explains, without a hint of emotion, that the Preston men stretched Jim out on a large table and used meat cleavers to chop off his arms and legs while he was fully conscious.
Just listening to it is hard.
She describes the sheer volume of blood, watching the dogs lick it off the floorboards. And then she delivers the ultimate horror. She says they cooked his severed limbs on a wood stove and violently forced her to eat his flesh. She stares at Pete and says she can still taste the sear of his meat on her tongue.
What Justine is describing is an event so far outside the realm of human processing that the brain's standard coping mechanisms simply implode. She is experiencing profound dissociation.
The mind just breaks.
In trauma psychology, when a person is subjected to inescapable, overwhelming terror and pain, and neither fight nor flight is possible, the mind deploys a severe survival mechanism. It detaches from reality. The core identity of the Wellesley-educated woman shattered to protect itself from the unbearable reality of what she was forced to consume.
And we see how she has reconstructed her reality in the aftermath. As the sun begins to set, she adopts this deeply unnerving robotic mantra. She repeats, "Now it's night, now you fuck me."
It's so unsettling.
She begins to aggressively initiate sexual contact with Pete. She tells him that the Preston boys come down to the pens to rape her, but she dismissively claims they aren't good at it. She is using raw sexuality as a mechanism to dominate Pete, to exert some microscopic shred of control in an environment where she has absolutely zero agency over her own existence.
It is a horrific manifestation of the fawn response, mutated by extreme trauma. She has internalized and adopted the predatory, hypersexualized nature of her captors because her original moral framework was completely annihilated.
And Pete's reaction to this manipulation is the crux of the moral debate in this section. Pete is deeply in love with Megan. Earlier that same day, he was thinking about ring sizes and marriage.
He was a normal guy.
He is physically repulsed by Justine's filth, her clear madness, and the atrocity she just described. Yet when the sun goes down and she begins to manipulate him in the dark, he succumbs. He gives in and sleeps with her in the dirt of the dog pen.
This raises a profound question about the intersection of morality and biology.
I was thinking about this using an analogy of metallurgy materials under extreme stress. In engineering, you have some metals that, when subjected to immense continuous pressure, will eventually bend until they snap completely. That's Justine. Her structural integrity failed.
Right, the snapping point.
But other metals, through a process called work hardening, actually become denser and harder under that same pressure. I look at Pete's decision, and I have to ask, is Pete snapping? Is his decision to sleep with Justine a sign of fundamental moral weakness, a betrayal of the civilized man he claimed to be? Or is it a raw, biological survival mechanism overriding his brain when it simply cannot process any more fear?
Clinically, it is almost certainly the latter. Pete is in the throes of a profound, compounding trauma response.
It's not a conscious choice.
Consider his physical and chemical state. His body has been severely beaten. He has endured the profound psychological violation of sexual assault at the store. He is facing imminent gruesome death, and his nervous system has been marinating in cortisol and adrenaline for hours. His prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for complex decision-making, morality, and fidelity, is essentially shutting down due to cognitive overload.
It's a system failure.
Yes. When Justine offers a moment of physical release, it acts as a bizarre anchor to a basic, primitive human drive amidst total sensory and moral deprivation.
It grounds him.
The text explicitly notes Pete's internal conflict. He feels immense crushing guilt, viewing his actions as a betrayal of Megan. But the biological imperative of the hindbrain, the primitive survival-driven center, overrides logic. He is seeking a momentary chemical release of dopamine and oxytocin just to endure the next hour in the dark. It is a dark comfort, but in that cage, it is the only comfort available.
To contrast that snapping response, we have to look at the metal that hardens. And that brings us to Michelle Runyon, the woman whose ID Megan found on the road. Michelle's situation is arguably worse than Pete's.
Much worse, arguably.
She is chained by her wrists to a thick wooden rafter in the dark, damp, subterranean cellar of the Maynard household. She is the designated centerpiece for the upcoming holiday dinner. She has been stripped naked, gagged, and manacled for days.
It's a worst-case scenario.
Yet when Abby Maynard, the 20-year-old local daughter, comes down to the cellar to taunt her and viciously punch her in the stomach, Michelle's reaction is extraordinary. The text describes her eyes not as broken or vacant, but as hard, calculating, and fiercely determined.
Michelle is maintaining her cognitive faculties through sheer, stubborn willpower. She is fighting off dissociation.
She refuses to break.
When Abby temporarily removes the gag and mocks her, asking if Michelle thinks she's stupid enough to let her go, Michelle does not scream. She does not beg for her life or cry. She instantly analyzes the psychological profile of her abuser and attempts to negotiate.
She realizes Abby is deeply frustrated and unhappy, and Michelle weaponizes that. She boldly offers to show Abby things that will rock her world sexually, attempting to barter intimacy for leverage.
Exactly. She is reading the power dynamics of the room perfectly. She recognizes that Abby, despite being a captor, is also oppressed by her own family.
She finds the weak spot.
Michelle is playing a desperate, high-stakes game of psychological chess, using logic and manipulation to try and pry open a window for escape. She refuses to be reduced to livestock.
The resilience is genuinely awe-inspiring. But while Pete and Justine are trapped in outdoor cages succumbing to degradation, and Michelle is chained in a cellar playing mind games, there is another outsider who is completely free in the woods.
Right, our wild card.
And she is adapting to the violence of Hopkins Bend with a speed that is almost terrifying to witness.
We are returning to Jessica Sloan. If we are looking at the evolution of a survivor, her trajectory is perhaps the most dynamic and disturbing in the entire narrative.
Let's track her path, because the body count she racks up is staggering. We are watching her transform from a victim seeking a very specific, localized revenge against her rapist into an indiscriminate, lethal force of nature.
She becomes a machine.
After she flees the clearing and escapes the mutated Kinchers, she reaches that stream we talked about. While resting, she is discovered by a young, deformed Kincher boy. He gets scared and tries to run away. Jessica doesn't let him go. She tackles him to the ground to keep him quiet and literally raises a heavy rock, fully intending to smash a child's head in to preserve her stealth.
It is a huge threshold to cross.
But she is interrupted by a local hunter carrying a rifle.
And pay attention to the dialogue here. The hunter doesn't try to help her. He tells the Kincher boy to leave, essentially claiming Jessica as his personal property. He tells her she belongs to him now.
Disgusting.
In that moment, Jessica's brain calculates that she has simply traded an irrational monster for a rational, systemic one.
So what does she do? She pretends to surrender, she acts submissive, waits for him to lower his guard, then rolls away, pulls her .38 revolver, and shoots the hunter point blank in the throat.
Zero hesitation.
As the hunter bleeds out, the Kincher boy panics and tries to sprint away to warn the others. Jessica calmly aims and shoots the fleeing boy in the back, killing him instantly. She strips the dead hunter of his rifle and his hunting knife, upgrading her arsenal.
This sequence completely inverts the traditional final girl trope in horror literature. The final girl usually survives through a combination of pure luck, perceived moral purity, and eventually a desperate defensive burst of violence in the final act.
Usually at the very end, yeah.
Jessica is not defensive. She is actively, ruthlessly predatory.
She is going on the offensive. Later, she stumbles out of the deep woods and finds a seemingly quiet cabin. She sees a local man named Ben sitting on the porch. Now, a normal person might try to sneak around the property to steal a car, avoiding contact.
So it would make sense.
Not Jessica. She walks right out into the open, marches up the steps, presses the barrel of a stolen rifle directly into Ben's face, and demands the keys to his truck.
She is weaponizing the element of surprise. The locals of Hopkins Bend expect outsiders to be terrified, disoriented prey. Jessica is exploiting that assumption by acting with overwhelming, audacious aggression.
Ben tries to play along and leads her inside the cabin, where a second man is hiding to ambush her. When the second man lunges, Jessica doesn't panic or freeze. She fights back viscerally, manages to grab the dropped rifle, and shoots the second man cleanly in the head.
She's just so fast.
And then, Her adrenaline-fueled rage boils over. She turns back to Ben, who is on the ground, and she doesn't shoot him. She uses the heavy wooden stock of the rifle to repeatedly, savagely smash Ben's face until his nose and teeth are entirely crushed and he stops breathing.
She beats a man to death with a blunt object. The psychological toll of that act is immense. We talked earlier about moral injury. This is the complete obliteration of her previous moral framework.
There's no going back from that.
She is adopting the brutal, remorseless methods of the monsters in order to escape them.
She finds Ben's truck, manages to get the engine turning over, and makes a desperate run for the highway. But she hits a police roadblock set up by the corrupt sheriff's department. The cops open fire, shattering her windshield, and she crashes the truck into the ditch.
It just never ends for her.
A deputy approaches the wreck, assuming she's either dead or incapacitated. Jessica plays possum. When he gets close enough, she kicks upward with her boots, striking the cop in the face so hard she shatters his nose, driving bone into his brain and killing him. She grabs his dropped service weapon and waits in the ditch. When a sudden distraction occurs, another fleeing victim crashes a different truck into the roadblock. Jessica uses the chaos to gun down 2 more cops, shooting them in the back. She then steals a fully operational, idling police cruiser and speeds off into the night.
She single-handedly wipes out a significant portion of the town's law enforcement in under 5 minutes. She is shedding the societal constraints of Nashville and mastering the violent, lawless rules of Hopkins Bend faster than the locals can comprehend.
So what does this all mean for her soul? Because after she escapes the roadblock, she pulls the cruiser over on a dark stretch of road and uses the flashing police lights to trick a civilian into stopping. Is a guy named Larry Wolf, driving a Chevy Nova.
Poor Larry.
Larry is a local, but he lives on the outskirts and seems somewhat detached from the deep woods cannibal cults. He thinks she's a cop, and he awkwardly flirts with her. Jessica gets into the passenger seat, aggressively kisses him, grabs his crotch to assert dominance, and secures an agreement to go hide out at his house.
She's using whatever she has.
But the dark, horrifying irony here is revealed in her internal monologue. She admits to herself that when she pulled him over, she fully intended to stick the gun in his face, force him into the trunk, and steal his car, replicating the exact crime she committed against Hoke.
The cycle continues.
And as they are driving to his house, she actually contemplates raping Larry at gunpoint just to relieve her own tension and exert total power over him. It forced me to ask, has Jessica ceased to be the protagonist? Has the environment infected her so deeply that she has simply become another monster in the woods?
That internal conflict is the absolute crux of her character arc. Her own internal monologue notes that she feels like the Terminator. Her morality has been almost entirely subsumed by the raw, biological will to live and dominate. However, if we look closely, the text does suggest a nuanced psychological difference between her and the locals.
How so? Because contemplating raping someone at gunpoint seems pretty far gone.
It is incredibly dark. But consider the origin of the violence. Hoke's violence against Jessica in Nashville and the systemic violence of the town are born of malice, entitlement, and a desire for sadistic dominance.
It's evil for the sake of evil.
Exactly. Jessica's violence, while increasingly extreme, proactive, and horrifying, originated from a desperate need for survival and autonomy. However, you are absolutely right that the line is rapidly blurring. When she chases down Larry's car, she notes that she is experiencing the thrill of the hunt. The hyperarousal of trauma has become addictive.
Going back to the black hole analogy, the immense gravity of Hopkins Bend is pulling her past the event horizon, and she is actively becoming part of the dark matter.
That is a perfect way to conceptualize it. And what is so vital to understand for the broader sociological critique of the novel is that it isn't just the outsiders who are trapped and warped by the town's toxic culture.
Right.
The systemic rot of Hopkins Bend consumes its own residents from the inside out. We see this vividly when the narrative perspective shifts to a local insider, Abigail Maynard.
Abby is such a complex, deeply frustrating character to analyze. She is 20 years old, which in the regressive, hyper-traditional society of Hopkins Bend makes her a spinster, an old maid.
That's 20?
She is biologically barren in a community that values women almost exclusively for their reproductive capacity to expand the cannibalistic dynasty. Her family history is grim. Her older sister Ruth literally died after giving birth to 8 children.
Awful.
Her younger sister Laura, who is only 17, already has 2 toddlers running around and is heavily pregnant with a third. Abby spends her days sitting in her rocking chair, staring blankly at a broken television set, fantasizing about procedural police shows and glamorous soap operas, while her mother, Carol, verbally and physically abuses her, constantly calling her a dry, useless waste.
The author paints a picture of domesticity that is bizarre, suffocating, and deeply disturbing. You have this multi-generational family bickering over mundane things, scolding children for disrespect, arguing over stew in the kitchen while simultaneously sharpening knives and preparing to slaughter and consume a living human being chained in their own cellar.
It's just so casually insane.
It is the ultimate display of how systemic evil normalizes atrocity. For the Maynards, cannibalism wasn't an exotic, secretive ritual. It is a mundane holiday chore, akin to a normal family preparing a Thanksgiving turkey.
And Abby's place at the absolute bottom of this social hierarchy is miserable. To escape her mother's screaming, she goes for a walk deep into the woods to clear her head. She is actively contemplating running away, maybe even taking the captive Michelle Runyon with her to start a new life.
She just wants out.
But as she wanders, she stumbles upon a secluded clearing and witnesses her younger sister, Laura, having passionate, fully consensual sex with one of the severely deformed Kincher boys. These are the very monsters that the normal families openly despise.
Breaking the ultimate taboo.
Abby is physically disgusted by the sight, but the text notes she is also secretly, confusingly aroused by the raw transgression of it. She accidentally snaps a twig, and Laura spots her in the bushes.
What follows is a brutal, hierarchical demonstration of power within a totalitarian microsociety. Laura does not panic or apologize for breaking the town's ultimate taboo. Instead, she goes on the offensive.
She turns it right back around.
She aggressively mocks Abby's barrenness, tells her she is weak and pathetic, and then coldly orders the Kincher boy to rape her older sister. And he obeys. He violently assaults Abby in the dirt while Laura literally stands over them, laughing, strangling Abby to keep her pinned, and whispering that she is a waste of air.
It is a devastating, incredibly tough scene to read. But it forces us, as the audience analyzing this text, into a very uncomfortable ethical and emotional position. Can we feel genuine sympathy for Abby?
That's the big question.
Think about her actions. She actively participates in a cannibalistic society. She goes down to the cellar and violently punches Michelle Runyon in the stomach just to vent her own daily frustrations. She sexually molests the captives when no one is looking. She's undeniably complicit in kidnapping and torture.
She does terrible things.
Yet simultaneously, she is brutally oppressed, verbally destroyed, and physically raped by her own family members. Is it possible to pity a monster who is being victimized by bigger monsters?
This raises an important question. It's one of the most important questions in sociological study, the complex nature of complicity and victimhood within a closed totalitarian system.
Yeah.
How much agency does an individual truly have when they are born into a society where morality is inverted?
It's hard to say.
Mama Weeks, the local hash-smoking seer that Abby visits immediately after the assault, acts as a fascinating catalyst for this debate.
Right, Mama Weeks is a wild card. She is an older woman who lives alone, and we learn she actually murdered her own abusive husband and buried his body in the yard specifically to gain her independence.
She took her own power.
When Abby comes to her, terrified that the assault might have miraculously made her pregnant with a mutated Kincher child, Mama Weeks reads her fortune. She confirms Abby isn't pregnant, which is Abby's greatest fear alleviated.
But Mama Weeks does more than tell the future. She offers ideological poison against the town's patriarchy. She represents a chaotic, individualistic rebellion against the rigid, oppressive structure of Hopkins Bend. She explicitly tells Abby that she is not bound to live as her mother or her sister dictate. She gives Abby permission to forge her own violent path.
It is a twisted form of empowerment.
It is. And Abby's journey reveals a critical truth about systemic corruption. The evil of Hopkins Bend isn't a utopia, even for the perpetrators who benefit from it. It is a suffocating, violent, paranoid hierarchy that inevitably breeds internal betrayal.
Nobody is truly safe.
Abby's burning hatred for her sister Laura, her deep-seated fear of her mother Carol, and her crushing realization that her society has absolutely no place for her. It all ferments into a dangerous, rebellious rage. We can completely abhor her cruel actions toward the captives, while simultaneously recognizing the tragic reality that she is a product of a poisoned environment, frantically seeking a desperate exit from her own nightmare.
It is an incredibly layered, morally ambiguous portrait. The line between oppressor and oppressed is just completely smeared. So, as we pull back from the depths of this dark, bloody narrative, let's try to synthesize the sheer volume of psychological insight we've unpacked today.
We covered a lot of ground.
We have witnessed the terrifying breakneck speed at which civilized morality crumbles when faced with sheer survival. We saw it when Pete allowed his biological drive to override his fidelity in a filthy dog pen, and we saw it in its most extreme form as Jessica transformed from a traumatized victim into a ruthless, proactive killer just to stay alive.
Total transformation.
We've explored the horrifying duality of a society like Hopkins Bend, where evil isn't chaotic, but rather institutionalized, bureaucratic, and hidden efficiently behind a facade of quaint rural normalcy and corrupt law enforcement.
The town itself is the villain.
And we've examined the profound neurological impact of extreme trauma, how it completely shatters a mind like Justine's into dissociation, or hardens a mind like Michelle's into cold, calculating defiance.
Ultimately, the text forces us to confront the profound fragility of the social contract we all rely on. It strips away the insulating comforts of modern life. The cell phones, the designer bags, the credit cards, the expectation of retail safety. And it ruthlessly asks, what remains of our humanity when only raw physical survival matters?
Exactly. And that is the thought I want to leave you, the listener, with today. Tomorrow, as you go about your day, as you drive over the structural bridges of society, stop and consider how fragile the unwritten rules of your own daily life might actually be.
Just think about it.
If your car broke down on a lonely stretch of road, if you were stripped of your digital safety nets and dropped into those dark woods, what lines would you find yourself willing to cross? When the pressure is applied, would your morality bend and snap, or would it harden? Would you hold on to your civilized ideals, or would you pick up the rifle and become the apex predator?
It is a profound, deeply unsettling thought experiment that forces us to look in the mirror.
And as a final provocative thought for you to mull over long after this deep dive ends, think back to the lore of the Garden of Blight. We spend a lot of time discussing the ancient curse that physically mutated the Kincher clan into monsters with single eyes and elongated jaws.
The physical curse.
But I want you to ask yourself, is the real curse of Hopkins Bend the physical deformity of the Kinchers? Or is the true Garner Blight the insidious, invisible moral decay that infects absolutely everyone who steps foot across that town line?
That's the real monster.
A psychological decay that rots the soul, institutionalizes murder for profit, and drags even the innocent victims like Pete, like Jessica, down into the dirt, forcing them to adopt the methods of monsters just to survive the night. Something to think about the next time you decide to take a scenic detour on a lonely country road. Until next time, keep diving deep.